Tried everything, didn't they? They whispered, they plotted, they celebrated in private every time they thought you were finished. They pulled strings, spread lies, and did everything possible to bury you under weight that would have broken most people. And yet, here you are, still standing, still breathing, still unshaken. That's the fact your enemies can't stomach. It's not just that you survived, it's that you came out sharper, stronger, and more dangerous than before. They wanted the assignment over your life to crush you, but instead it exposed how weak they really were. Because while they were hiding in shadows, you were learning to walk through fire. Look around, chosen one. The air is different now. The silence isn't just silence, it's the sound of enemies choking on their own defeat. They act like they don't care anymore, but watch closely. The shift is real. They move differently around you. They avoid your eyes. They talk less when you walk into the room. That's not coincidence, that's recognition. They know you've done the impossible. You turned every setup into a lesson, every betrayal into a training ground. While they were busy doubting, you were building. And now their fear is louder than their gossip. And before I go further, pause for a second. If this message is already striking a chord with you, if you feel the truth of it in your bones, then press that like button and subscribe right now. That's how you pay this message forward. That's how we strengthen this voice together, so no chosen one ever feels like they're standing alone. Now let's go even deeper, because you need to hear this. The universe never gave you the easy assignment. You weren't handed shortcuts or comfort. You were given battles that bent your spirit, but never broke it. You were given nights of silence so loud it felt like the world forgot you. You were given betrayals from the very people you trusted most. And still, you refused to collapse. Psychologists will tell you that most people in your situation either give up or self-destruct. But you didn't implode. You transformed. You used your pain as blueprints. You rebuilt yourself from the wreckage. You turned scars into maps, and those maps led you somewhere most people will never reach. Resilience that looks supernatural. Think back to the times they left you in the dirt, thinking you'd never rise again. Remember the conversations behind closed doors, when they mocked you, when they counted you out. That's their history, not your destiny. What they forgot is this: pressure doesn't just crush, it creates. Diamonds don't come from comfort, they're forged in unbearable weight. And your life has been nothing but proof of that. You didn't just survive the storm. You became the storm's survivor story, the living example that the universe always balances the scales. Enemies hate this part the most. You didn't come out bitter, you came out better. That unsettles them more than anything, because bitterness they could have mocked, but growth they can't explain away. You glow in ways they can't dim. You walk with confidence that can't be faked. You embody strength that can't be borrowed. And that leaves them tormented, because they know deep down, if they had been given your assignment, it would have buried them alive. Chosen one, listen closely. Your existence alone is evidence that the impossible is possible. You've done what others said couldn't be done. You healed wounds without support. You turned loneliness into fuel. You stared betrayal in the face and still refused to quit. You turned survival into strategy, and that strategy has made you untouchable. That's why the atmosphere around you feels different now. It's not your imagination, it's reality shifting in your favor. The assignment over your life wasn't for the weak, and you proved it by carrying it with strength that no textbook, no teacher, no critic could have prepared you for. And the truth is this: you didn't just carry it, you made it look like art. That's why your enemies are quiet now. That's why they're restless in their own homes, replaying what went wrong, asking themselves how you managed to keep rising when everything was designed to bring you down. The universe chose you not because you were the loudest, the strongest, or the most obvious choice. It chose you because you were willing to endure, to bend without breaking, to keep walking when the road was covered in thorns. So let them sit in confusion. Let them wonder how you're still here. The assignment over your life will never make sense to the average mind, because your path was never meant to be average. You are the proof. You are the weapon forged in fire. You are the story that should have ended but didn't. And as we move forward in this message, remember this: what broke others became your training ground, and what was meant to destroy you has already turned into the reason you can't be stopped. So here's the real question. Are you ready to walk through this with me, step by step? Because what we're about to uncover isn't surface-level motivation. It's the raw truth behind why the assignment on your life was never built for the weak. Drop the number 777 in the comments if you know deep down that you've already done the impossible, even if the world never gave you credit for it. That simple act is more than engagement. It's you standing in agreement with every other chosen one who has carried the weight and still refused to break. And if you're still here, listening, then it means the universe is making sure this message finds you at the exact time you need it. Stay with me, because the deeper we go, the more this is going to confirm everything you've been questioning about your journey. This isn't just about surviving pain. It's about understanding why you were chosen to endure what others couldn't. And trust me, if you're a true chosen one, you'll feel the pull to lean in all the way until the end. So let's step into it together, one layer at a time. Let's get started. Number 1. You carried what would have killed them instantly. They thought the weight would bury you. The truth is, it buried them in silence when you kept walking. Chosen one, let's strip it down to the bare bones. You were handed an assignment that would have shattered the average soul on the very first day. That's not an exaggeration, it's a fact. Look at the people around you, the ones who mocked you, who tried to measure you by their limited standards. Imagine if they had been given the storms you faced. Would they have lasted? No. They would have cried for sympathy, begged for shortcuts, or vanished into distraction and numbness. But you didn't. You walked straight through darkness with no guarantee of light waiting for you at the end. And still, you didn't collapse. That's what unsettles them most. The enemy hates this truth. Your resilience is not built on applause or recognition, it's built on scars. You weren't shaped by easy victories, you were sculpted in silence, in betrayal, in the moments when the world turned its back and left you bleeding with no hand to pull you up. And here's the part they'll never say out loud. Deep down, they know they couldn't have handled it. They're haunted by the question, how are you still here when everything should have destroyed you? But you already know the answer. You weren't born to crumble. You weren't designed for shortcuts. You weren't wired to numb the pain. You came into this life with an internal blueprint that screamed, impossible is the only option worth chasing. That's why nothing makes sense to them when they look at you. They see someone who walked through betrayal and didn't turn bitter. Someone who carried loneliness but turned it into fuel. Someone who faced humiliation but still kept their dignity intact. They can't compute that because their idea of strength has always been cheap, flashy, and borrowed. Yours? It's raw, it's unpolished, and it's terrifying because it's real. Think about it. How many times did people assume you'd fold? How many times did they look at your circumstances and whisper, "That's it, they're done"? And yet, every single time, you got up, maybe slower than before, maybe with scars showing, but still walking. That's endurance, chosen one. That's not survival in the way they understand it. It's a different breed altogether. Survival says, "I barely made it out." Endurance says, "I made it out, and I carried wisdom with me." The odds weren't just stacked against you, they were engineered to break you. It wasn't an accident that you faced betrayal from the very people you trusted. It wasn't random that doors slammed shut just when you thought you were finally catching a break. That was the test. Could you carry weight without collapsing? Could you lose everything without losing yourself? Most people can't even handle criticism without spiraling into anger or self-pity. But you carried whole seasons of rejection, entire winters of being overlooked, and you still didn't let it turn you into something ugly. That's what separates you. That's what they hate. Let's call it what it is. You are living proof that resurrection isn't about miracles. It's about refusing to die when death is all around you. You've been in rooms where the silence was suffocating, where nobody clapped for you, where nobody cared if you kept going, and still you kept going. That's not normal. That's not common. That's not weak. That's the strongest thing a soul can do. And here's the brutal reality. If they had been given your assignment, they wouldn't just have quit, they would have self-destructed. They would have taken shortcuts that destroyed them, leaned on vices that enslaved them, or drowned in bitterness until nothing was left. You didn't. You sat with the pain. You studied it. You turned it into a teacher. You let it carve out wisdom, integrity, and vision. That's what makes you impossible to imitate. Enemies will whisper that you're lucky. They'll say you got breaks. They'll invent excuses for why you're still standing because they cannot bear to admit the truth. It was never luck. It was never breaks. It was discipline. It was courage. It was your refusal to collapse, even when collapsing would have been the easier road. You carried assignments so heavy that most souls would have begged the universe for a different life. But you carried it anyway. And let's be honest, this is why your story feels unbelievable, even to you sometimes, because it doesn't add up. By logic, you shouldn't even be here. By statistics, you should have lost yourself a long time ago. By history, you should have been written off and forgotten. But the fact that you're still here proves something deeper. You were never ordinary. Your assignment was proof from the beginning that you weren't put here to live an average life. You were placed here as the exception, the one who makes the impossible look like a blueprint. So when you wonder why people envy you, why they mock you, why they attack you, it's because your endurance exposes their weakness. Your existence alone is a mirror that shows them what they couldn't be. You don't even have to say a word. Your scars speak for you. And those scars tell a story that destroys the lies they comfort themselves with. They wanted to believe you'd never rise, and yet here you are, risen beyond recognition. Chosen one, understand this. Your assignment wasn't just survival, it was transformation. It wasn't just about you getting through, it was about showing the world what a human soul looks like when it refuses to surrender. You didn't just walk out of the fire, you walked out carrying proof that fire cannot consume what was built to last. That's why people study you in silence. That's why they can't stop watching, even when they pretend they don't care. Because you are the walking evidence that endurance is possible, and that endurance is the greatest power the universe ever gave. So let this sink in. What they thought would destroy you became your crown. What they designed as your burial became your resurrection. What would have killed them instantly became your reason to rise. That is the impossible you've done. And that is why the assignment over your life will never make sense to them, because it wasn't for them. It was for you, and you carried it with a strength that turned enemies into silent witnesses of your victory. Number 2. The assignment wasn't about winning, it was about keeping your sanity. They weren't after your body, chosen one. They were after your mind, because once your mind is gone, everything else follows. Most people think the hardest part of your journey was the losses, the betrayals, or the struggles that left you with scars. But that's not the truth. The real battlefield wasn't outside you. It was inside your head. The assignment over your life was never just about pain. It was about whether you could hold on to your sanity when everything around you was built to strip it away. That's the part they'll never admit, because they know exactly how hard they tried to break your mind. Gaslighting is the enemy's favorite weapon, because if they can make you question reality, they don't have to lift a hand to destroy you. Think back. How many times did you doubt yourself, not because you were wrong, but because someone made you feel like you were? How many times did you walk away from a conversation more confused than when you entered it, replaying words in your head, asking yourself if you were overreacting, if you were imagining things? That wasn't random. That was calculated. They didn't need chains to hold you down. Their weapon was manipulation, emotional games, silent treatment, twisting of your truth. They didn't fight your body, they fought your perception of reality. And here's what makes you terrifying to your enemies. You survived that war without losing your grip on who you are. You didn't let them steal your core. You may have bent, you may have cried, you may have carried nights of confusion so heavy it felt like your brain was splitting, but you didn't let go of yourself. That's not just survival, that's mastery. The strongest ones are not the ones who win the loudest battles, but the ones who stay sane while walking through madness. Imagine this. You're standing in a house where every mirror is warped, every voice echoes lies, every room is designed to confuse you. Most people would collapse in paranoia or give up and let the illusions define them. But not you. You learn to walk carefully, to test the floor before stepping, to check the reflection twice before believing it. That's why your peace is unshakable now. Because you earned it in a war zone of manipulation. And yes, it hurt. There were nights when your soul was screaming, but your face was smiling. Days when you carried wisdom no one else could see, because every time you tried to speak your truth, it was twisted, mocked, or dismissed. That silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. You learned the art of observing without reacting, of analyzing instead of exploding, of protecting your peace while everyone around you was trying to snatch it away. Your silence wasn't surrender, it was self-preservation. And that's why you're still here. Chosen one, ask yourself this. How many people do you know who crumble the moment someone disrespects them? How many lash out, spiral, or lose themselves over petty insults or small rejections? And now compare that to you, walking through years of psychological warfare designed to make you lose your grip on reality, and still you remained whole. That is not normal. That is not weakness. That is unbreakable discipline. Enemies hate this the most. They wanted you bitter. They wanted you paranoid. They wanted you to become the very thing they accused you of being. But you didn't. Instead, you questioned everything, not out of fear, but out of discernment. You learned to separate lies from truth, manipulation from authenticity. You trained your mind to filter out poison and protect what was sacred inside you. They thought they were confusing you, but all they did was sharpen your instincts. Imagine this, a soldier walking through a field of hidden mines, every step a potential explosion. That's what your mental battlefield looked like. But step by step, you learned the terrain. You memorized where the danger was. You marked in your heart which patterns meant manipulation, which silences meant deceit. You didn't run blindly. You didn't freeze in fear. You moved carefully, deliberately, and you survived the minefield. That's why your peace today is priceless, because it was earned step by cautious step. Peace is not given. Peace is built piece by piece, like a mosaic made from broken glass. And that's exactly what you did. You took the shattered pieces of your mind, the fragments left from betrayal, humiliation, and confusion, and you rearranged them into something beautiful. That mosaic became your clarity, your glow, your light. No one else can copy it, because it wasn't bought or borrowed. It was created through pain. Most people wouldn't have survived with their sanity intact. This is why your glow feels different. It's not surface-level confidence. It's the quiet confidence of someone who has walked through mental hell and come back with peace. When you walk into a room, people sense it. They don't know the details, but they feel the weight of what you've endured. They see that you cannot be easily shaken, and that unsettles them. Because while they fall apart at the smallest crisis, you stand calm in storms that would drown them. Chosen one, let's get brutally honest. This assignment wasn't about success in the way people measure it. It wasn't about material wins, achievements, or applause. The real assignment was, could you keep your mind steady in chaos? Could you stay sane in environments designed to drive you insane? And you did. That's the impossible you've already done. You mastered your own mind when others would have handed theirs over to despair. So when people look at you now, puzzled by your glow, they'll never understand the price you paid for it. They'll never grasp that your calm smile is not naivety, it's survival. They'll never know that your clarity was forged in nights of confusion so heavy you thought you'd break. And that's fine. Let them wonder. Let them guess. They don't need to understand the details. What matters is this: your mind is still yours. That alone makes you unstoppable. They couldn't break you, so now they fear you. Because nothing is more dangerous than someone who survived the war inside their own head. And here's the final gut punch for your enemies. Every attempt to break your sanity only exposed their own madness. They wasted their energy trying to twist your truth, and in the end, you came out with sharper discernment than ever. They thought they were playing games with you, but the universe was using those games to train your mind into steel. Now, nothing they throw at you can stick. You see through it all. You walk with a calmness that mocks their chaos. You embody the one thing they never thought you'd keep: your sanity. So remember this: the assignment wasn't about success as the world defines it. It was about mastery. It was about proving that no matter how many lies were told, no matter how much manipulation was thrown at you, no matter how brutal the psychological warfare became, you would not lose yourself. And you didn't. You're still here, chosen one, mind intact, heart steady, glow untouchable. That is the impossible you've done. Number 3, you shattered the silence they all bowed to. They didn't hate you for being different. They hated you for exposing what they were too afraid to name. Chosen one, you weren't born into peace. You were born into patterns, cycles of silence, manipulation, guilt-tripping and control that had been running for generations. Everyone else accepted it. They called it normal. They called it family. They called it tradition. But you felt the poison in the air. Even as a child, you saw through the cracks. You asked questions that made rooms go quiet. This isn't love. Why do we act like nothing's wrong? You spoke truth in places where truth was forbidden, and for that, you became the target. They labeled you ungrateful. They called you rebellious. But here's the fact. The moment you showed clarity, you became a threat. Because you weren't just confronting individuals, you were exposing entire systems of dysfunction. You weren't breaking rules, you were breaking the chains that kept everyone else trapped. That's why they mocked you. That's why they isolated you. Not because you were wrong, but because you made them face what they'd spent years hiding. Imagine this. A room filled with people sitting in the dark. They've been in that darkness so long, their eyes adjusted. They don't even notice it anymore. Then you walk in holding a lantern. Suddenly, every corner, every shadow, every hidden thing is visible. Do they thank you? No. They attack you because your light reveals what they were comfortable ignoring. That's exactly why you felt like the outcast. Clarity is dangerous in a world addicted to denial. Chosen one, here's the truth. Cycles don't end because they fade away. They end because someone has the courage to break them, and that someone was you. The assignment over your life wasn't about keeping the peace. It was about disrupting the false peace that was built on silence. You carried the weight of standing alone in rooms where everyone pretended nothing was wrong. That's why it hurt. That's why you felt like the enemy. But the cycle ends with you. So when you wonder why they treated you the way they did, remember, you weren't sent to blend in. You were sent to expose, to challenge, to end what others were too afraid to name. That's not rebellion. That's revolution. Number 4, you did what the comfortable never had the courage to face. They laughed at your breakdowns because they never had the guts to show theirs. That's the difference. You lived the truth they were too weak to reveal. Chosen one, while the privileged played it safe behind polished images and carefully filtered lives, you were out here bleeding in real time. You weren't crafting a performance. You weren't staging a highlight reel. You were surviving. You were healing in public while breaking in private, not for sympathy, not for applause, but because hiding was never an option. They didn't see how much it cost you just to keep your soul intact while the world demanded you smile. Imagine this. Others stood behind velvet curtains, rehearsing their lines, adjusting their masks, waiting until the stage was perfect. But you were thrown on stage mid-storm, with no script, no costume, just raw truth spilling from your veins. And instead of running, you stood there. That's courage. That's why they couldn't stomach you, because you made realness look stronger than their illusions. Transformation is not a photo shoot. It's demolition and reconstruction. You didn't have the luxury of waiting until the scars faded before showing your face. You moved while mourning. You led while lost. You healed while being judged. And still, you kept walking. They called it drama. They called it weakness. But deep down, they knew what they were really watching was a strength they didn't have a name for. Most people only parade growth once the wounds are hidden. But you let them see the sacred chaos, the unraveling, the raw edges, the messy becoming. They mocked you because they've never had to rebuild from ashes. They laughed at your tears because they've never faced a night where silence screamed louder than applause. Falling apart in public wasn't failure, it was the blueprint for freedom. And that's why your power now cannot be faked, cannot be copied. You didn't polish yourself into perfection, you clawed your way into truth. While they protected their image, you protected your soul. While they sought comfort, you built resilience. You bled in silence, healed out loud, and still walked with grace. That's not weakness. That's an indestructible foundation, the kind only built by fire. Number 5. You walked roads. They were too afraid to even imagine. They laughed because you had no map. Now they follow the trail you carved, bleeding through the wilderness. Chosen one, nothing about your journey has followed the usual script. While others had blueprints, mentors, and ladders to climb, you were thrown into uncharted territory with nothing but your will to survive. You weren't given a path. You were commanded to create one. That's why your story looks chaotic to outsiders. They see no order, no tradition, no easy steps to follow. But what they miss is this. You were never supposed to repeat someone else's life. You were sent here to break the mold, to tear down the false patterns, and to build something the world had never seen. When the guides betrayed you, the universe turned you into the compass. You didn't have hands holding you steady. The very people who were supposed to lead you were absent, distracted, or even working against you. Instead of inheriting direction, you had to carve your own, piece by piece, blow by blow. And that's why your life never fit into neat categories. While others took shortcuts, you were stripped bare of everything false and forced to build from ground zero. They can't understand that because their journeys came with safety nets, while yours was a free fall into the unknown. Imagine this. Others climb pre-built staircases, polished and secure. But you had to dig your own steps into a mountain with bleeding hands, no guarantee you'd even make it halfway. Yet somehow, you did. That's why your lessons hit different. They didn't come from textbooks or mentors. They came from betrayal, silence, rejection, and solitude. They were carved into your soul, not handed to you in a lecture. Imitators fail because they think strength is a formula. They don't realize strength is a wound that learned how to breathe. And that's why they can't copy you. They mimic your moves, but they don't carry the weight you carried. They imitate your glow, but they never survived the fire that forged it. You weren't just climbing levels, you were building them. Every time you got knocked down, you added a new layer of wisdom no one can steal. You are the map, the path, the compass, and the proof that uncharted territory can be walked. That's why you're unstoppable, because your story can't be replicated. Number 6. You were pulled into isolation so nothing could poison your mission. They thought leaving you out was rejection. The truth is, you were pulled away so their contamination couldn't touch you. Chosen one, let's get this straight. You weren't abandoned, you were protected. When the calls stopped, when the invites dried up, when people you poured yourself into suddenly turned cold, it wasn't punishment. It was surgery. The universe was cutting off everything that would have diluted your purpose. Rejection wasn't the wound, it was the shield. Isolation is never cruelty. It is the universe putting a lock on what is sacred until it's ready to be revealed. What you carried was too rare to be polluted by gossip, jealousy, or half-formed minds. You didn't just lose people, you lost illusions. Betrayals hurt, yes, but they also unmasked who was only present for convenience. And though it felt like loneliness, it was actually preservation. You weren't being broken apart. You were being built in silence. Imagine this, a seed buried underground. From the outside, it looks like nothing, forgotten, exiled. But in reality, roots are forming, strength is building, and a quiet explosion of life is preparing to break the surface. That was you. You weren't hidden because you were unworthy. You were hidden because exposure too soon would have killed the assignment over your life. There were conversations you weren't supposed to hear, energies you weren't meant to absorb, mentalities that could have infected your spirit. So the universe pulled you out. It isolated you like a secret weapon, refining you in stillness so nothing false could contaminate your foundation. Your silence became your shield, your solitude became your sword. And now look, the very people who dismissed you feel disturbed by your presence. Not because you're loud, but because you're real. You don't beg for their validation. You don't chase their circles. You don't need their approval. And that offends them to their core because they thought you would crumble without them. Instead, isolation refined you into clarity, independence, and strength. They thought you'd be weaker alone. Instead, you came out untouchable. Number 7. Your victories are revenge against the chains they tried to pass down. You weren't just born, you were deployed to break contracts your bloodline signed in silence. Chosen one, your success has never been about showing off. It's warfare. Every step forward you take is rebellion against the silent deals your bloodline made with dysfunction, the lies they swallowed, the pain they normalized, the silence they dressed up as strength. You were born into contracts you never signed, yet you had the courage to rip them apart with your bare hands. Others played the role they were handed. Stay quiet, stay small, stay broken. But you said no. You weren't here to recycle trauma. You were here to break it. Healing yourself was never just personal. It was generational revenge. That's why your path has felt heavier than most. You weren't just fixing your own wounds. You were confronting patterns centuries deep. Every time you chose honesty over keeping up appearances, therapy over gossip, boundaries over betrayal, you weren't just saving yourself. You were destroying blueprints that enslaved entire bloodlines. And that work wasn't gentle. It was war. Imagine this, a family tree where every branch leans crooked, bent by generations of secrets, pride, and fear. You showed up as the storm that split the roots wide open. That's why your life feels disruptive, because you are the question that shatters excuses. Your peace exposes their chaos. Your freedom makes their shackles rattle. Every win you've earned is a chain snapping in the background of history. Your very existence is vengeance, not through violence, but through victory, not through screaming, but through becoming. Every success you claim echoes like justice for the generations who couldn't break free. Your glow isn't vanity, it's liberation. It's proof that the cycle can end, and it ends with you. So when people look uneasy around you, understand why. Your presence alone exposes what they've tried to hide for years. You are living evidence that the curse didn't win. That's why your victories feel louder, heavier, unshakable. Because they aren't just for you, they are payback for every soul before you that never had the chance. Number 8. You were never too much. They were too small to hold you. They called you too much because admitting the truth that they were too little would have crushed them. Chosen one, let's get this clear once and for all. You were never too emotional, too intense, or too deep. You were too real for people still hiding behind masks. You weren't born to blend in. You were born to wake people up. And the truth is, most of them didn't want to be awakened. They wanted to stay asleep in their illusions, undisturbed. That's why your very presence felt like a disruption. Your sensitivity wasn't fragility, it was radar, tuned sharper than their denial could handle. You could feel lies before they were spoken. You picked up tension in rooms where everyone else pretended peace. You sensed betrayal in smiles others thought were convincing. That's not being dramatic. That's intelligence born from connection. But here's the problem. They couldn't control what they couldn't understand. So instead of admitting your gift, they labeled it a flaw. They called you too much to protect their comfort. Imagine this, a fire alarm blaring in a house full of smoke. Instead of thanking the alarm for saving their lives, people cover their ears, scream at it, or rip it off the wall. That's what they did to you. You didn't cause the fire. You exposed it, and exposure terrifies people addicted to denial. They didn't reject you for being too much. They rejected you for being too honest. What made them uncomfortable wasn't you. It was what you triggered in them. Your honesty forced them to confront their lies. Your passion revealed how numb they had become. Your fullness reminded them of the emptiness they had settled for. Saying you were too much was easier than admitting they were unprepared. But now you've stopped apologizing. You no longer dilute yourself to fit into their shallow waters. And look at what happened. The moment you embraced your depth, you became unstoppable. Because the truth is this, you were never too much. You were exactly what the room needed, just not what it wanted. That's where your power lives, in refusing to shrink, refusing to numb, refusing to be edited down into something small enough for their comfort. And now they can't ignore it. Number 9, your life was never a calling. It was a binding contract of fire. You didn't trip into destiny. You were signed into it before the world even knew your name. Chosen one, let's kill the lie that you just found your purpose along the way. No, it was never an accident. That quiet knowing you carried as a child, the way you sensed what others ignored, the restless pull that kept you from ever settling for average. None of it was random. It wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It was written into you from the very beginning, a contract sealed before you even had words. Darkness always smells the weight of a soul before it blooms. That's why you were attacked early. Think back. Why did the battles hit you when you were still young, still soft, still forming? Because the enemy didn't need an introduction. It felt your assignment before you could even explain it. That's why you were targeted when you had no armor. That's why you were hit with betrayals and chaos before you even understood what betrayal meant. The strategy was simple. Distort you before you discovered your power. Delay you before you could rise. Break you before you could build. But it failed. Every trap designed to derail you became proof of your resilience. You didn't stumble into strength. You crawled, fought, and bled your way into it. Others were allowed to coast, to blend in, to live quietly. You weren't. You were forced to fight harder, not because you were cursed, but because you were carrying an assignment too heavy for anyone else. This wasn't a calling you could decline. It was a contract branded into your existence. Imagine this, a soldier drafted into a war before they even understood the rules. That was you. While others played games, you were on the battlefield. While they were busy pretending, you were training without knowing you were training. And now, the same forces that once mocked you sit in silence, watching your rise. They thought confusion would break you, but instead, clarity became your weapon. This wasn't just a calling, it was a covenant, a sealed contract only you could carry, and you've carried it with authority, even when you had to crawl. That's why you're unstoppable now. Number 10. You were born seeing the game they thought was invisible. They hated your vision, not because it was wrong, but because you saw the truth before they were ready to face it. Chosen one, you've never just looked at people, you've seen through them. From an early age, you could walk into a room and feel the tension that no one dared to name. Families smiled, but you felt the fractures. Leaders spoke of humility, but you sensed the ego swelling under their words. Acts of kindness rang hollow because you detected the control hidden behind them. You weren't fooled, and that scared them. True sight is dangerous because it burns through illusions people have worshipped for years. Your gift was never about waiting for proof. You knew, you felt it in your bones when something was off. You didn't need explanations because your discernment was sharper than their justifications. But that made you a threat. Entire systems, families, communities, relationships were built on illusions, and systems built on lies cannot survive when someone walks in with unfiltered sight. So they turned on you. They couldn't manipulate you, so they tried to discredit you. They labeled you paranoid, too deep, too analytical. Hard to deal with, but none of that was about you. It was about them. Because being seen without giving permission is the deepest fear of the false. Gaslighting is the last defense of the liar who fears being exposed. They twisted your truth, not to correct you, but to confuse you. They thought if they could drown you in doubt, they could silence your clarity. But every attempt only sharpened you. Because once you see the system behind the mask, you can never unsee it. And once you name the game, you can never be played by it again. Imagine this, a magician thriving on illusions, dazzling a crowd. Then someone stands up and points out the strings. The magic crumbles, the performance collapses. That was you, chosen one. You ruined the show for people addicted to pretending. That's why they fought so hard to silence you. But you never surrendered your sight. You turned discernment into your shield, your compass, your weapon. And that's when true power began. Not when they applauded you, but when you refused to unsee the truth. Number 11. Your very existence put mediocrity on trial. They didn't hate your light. They hated the shadows it exposed inside themselves. Chosen one, your life has been a walking indictment against settling. You didn't have to say a word to make people uncomfortable. Your presence did it for you. The way you carried peace when chaos was expected. The way you refused to conform when conformity was the ticket to belonging. The way you showed up authentic in a world addicted to performance. That alone was enough to make them shift nervously in their seats. Authenticity feels like arrogance to people who only know how to perform. You never begged for acceptance. You walked in knowing who you were, and that was the threat. Not because you thought you were better, but because you refused to pretend. In rooms full of masks, you were a mirror, and mirrors make cowards tremble. People who never lifted a finger to support you suddenly found themselves irritated by your glow. Not because your light hurt them, but because it reminded them of everything they buried in themselves. Dreams abandoned, truths silenced, passions dimmed just to survive. Imagine this, a person burying a treasure deep underground, then pretending it never existed. Then you walk by, holding a similar treasure in plain sight. Instantly, their lie is exposed. That's what your evolution did. Your growth reminded them of what they gave up on. Your freedom mocked the cages they chose. Your progress proved that excuses are fragile, and that proof was unbearable for them. You were never their enemy. You were their unfinished story staring back at them. But most people aren't ready to look themselves in the eye. So instead of rising with you, they mocked you. They didn't mock you because you failed. They mocked you because you refused to settle. And nothing convicts the complacent faster than the presence of someone who kept going. Your life is the evidence they can't escape. Proof that freedom is possible. Proof that growth is real. Proof that excuses aren't necessary. You didn't dim your light. You let it blaze, and in doing so, you exposed every shadow they thought was hidden. That's why they couldn't stand you. Not because you hurt them, but because you revealed they had already hurt themselves by settling. Number 12. You did what they couldn't even imagine doing. The day you stopped begging for permission was the day their control died. Chosen one, there came a moment when you snapped the invisible chains. You stopped twisting yourself into something acceptable. You stopped contorting your truth just to be understood. You stopped waiting for the nod of approval that was never coming. That quiet decision changed everything. It was the moment you reclaimed yourself, and it terrified the people who once fed on your compliance. Manipulation only survives where validation is craved. Before, they could bend you, guilt you, keep you small because some part of you still wanted to be liked. But once you stopped needing that, the whole system collapsed. You started creating without applause, speaking without checking reactions, existing without emotional debt. And just like that, every relationship built on your smallness crumbled under the weight of your clarity. Imagine this, a puppet finally realizing the strings don't control it unless it agrees to move. The puppeteer panics, not because the puppet is violent, but because the illusion of ownership is broken. That's what you did. You became unprogrammable, unowned, and that is the purest form of power. They didn't call you selfish because you were wrong. They called you selfish because you stopped being theirs to control. Of course, they hated it. They labeled you arrogant, distant, too independent. But what they were really reacting to was your autonomy. You no longer flinched when they pulled. You no longer shrank when they criticized. You were free in a way they couldn't even conceptualize because their entire identity depended on being managed, approved, and validated. And here's the gut punch. You didn't just free yourself, you broke an unspoken rule. The rule that said you had to wait to be allowed. The rule that said power only comes after permission. You shattered it, and once you realized you never needed their consent to live fully, you became unstoppable. True rebellion isn't loud, it's quiet, steady, and impossible to move. You achieved what others couldn't even imagine, sovereignty over yourself, and that is a victory no enemy can steal. Number 13. Your humility wasn't weakness, it was tactical mastery. They mistook your silence for surrender, not realizing it was the sharpest weapon in the room. Chosen one, let's make something clear. You were never soft. You were never confused. You were never powerless. What they misread as weakness was discipline so deep it terrified them. You didn't flex, not because you couldn't, but because you didn't need to. You carried power so refined it didn't require noise. They thought your calm meant you were clueless. They thought your humility meant you were beneath them. But the truth is, they were watching mastery in motion. Real power doesn't shout. It waits, it calculates, it moves when the strike matters most. You weren't passive, you were patient. You didn't waste time arguing every insult. You didn't leap at every spotlight. You didn't burn energy proving yourself to people already committed to misunderstanding you. Why? Because you understood something they never will. Energy is currency, and you refused to spend yours cheaply. Imagine this, a lion sitting silently in tall grass while hyenas cackle and circle. The hyenas mistake silence for fear, but the lion isn't scared, it's strategic. That was you. While they mocked, you observed. While they spoke endlessly, you studied. You learned motives, not just words. You saw the system behind their performance, and you waited. That's not weakness. That's precision. Humility isn't hiding, it's protecting the assignment until the timing is undeniable. Your humility wasn't about dimming your worth, it was about protecting it. You understood that every move didn't need to be broadcast. You knew that your silence guarded doors that arrogance would have slammed shut. While others performed for attention, you built quietly. While they shouted for validation, you trained for endurance. And here's the brutal truth. They hated it, because nothing unsettles shallow egos more than someone who doesn't flinch under pressure, doesn't beg for approval, doesn't play the performance game. Your sovereignty didn't need applause to reign. It didn't need an audience to exist. Sovereignty doesn't scream, it governs, and that's what you've been doing all along. You were never powerless, chosen one. You were in control the entire time. And now, the same people who mistook your patience for weakness have no choice but to sit in silence while your mastery speaks louder than their noise ever could. Number 14. You did the impossible while they tried to burn you alive. They thought the fire would consume you, not realizing it was forging you into something indestructible. Chosen one, you didn't just do the impossible, you did it under fire. You weren't given silence, support, or safety nets. You were watched, judged, betrayed, and still you rose. You built under the weight of scrutiny. You healed while still bleeding. You advanced while they cheered for your downfall. Most people collapse under pressure. You became unstoppable in it. They mistook your ordinary appearance for fragility, never knowing you carried extraordinary fuel. They never believed you would make it, not because you lacked ability, but because you didn't parade your gifts. You didn't advertise your strength, so they assumed you were breakable. But what they couldn't see was your alignment, your frequency, the fire in your spirit that refused to dim. While they plotted in whispers, you moved in silence. While they mocked what they couldn't understand, you turned pain into blueprint. Imagine this, a blacksmith hammering metal in an open forge. Sparks fly, heat blazes, noise fills the room. To outsiders, it looks like destruction, but to the blacksmith, it's creation. That was you. Crafted in the open, transformed in real time, shaped under pressure no one thought you could endure. Your destiny didn't just survive their fire, it absorbed it, sharpened it, and turned it into fuel. They gossiped, hoping to drain you. They withheld support, hoping to exhaust you. They copied you, hoping to outrun you. But none of it worked, because you weren't fueled by ego. You were carried by assignment. You weren't trying to be seen, you were sent. And that difference is why their efforts collapsed while you kept advancing. Now, they're forced to admit what they denied, that you really did it, that what they mocked was wisdom disguised as madness, that what they called delusion was discernment. And now, the same blueprint they once ridiculed is what they quietly try to imitate. Every scar, every betrayal, every public test, it wasn't random. It was refinement. You didn't just walk through the fire, you walked out holding keys. You are not a copy, you are the code, a disruption, a living indictment against every limitation they placed on you. And nothing, absolutely nothing, can stop what's already in motion. And so, chosen one, here we are. Every scar, every silence, every fire you endured has revealed one undeniable truth. You did what the weak couldn't even imagine. You carried an assignment that wasn't meant to be easy, and you turned it into proof that the impossible can be conquered. That's not survival, that's legacy. If this message hit your spirit, honor it. Press the like button, subscribe for more, and drop 777 in the comments to declare your victory. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, because your story is too powerful to keep hidden.